what we've got today, and one of the things that we've talked about, you remember that for many of you that were with us from the beginning, we started looking at free, fair, safe, and secure elections. It was important for us to say that the election process, and we heard this across the board, both left and right want to make sure that when they go to vote, they get an opportunity to vote, and that the election and the vote process was counted fairly, and that everyone had an opportunity that should have the opportunity to vote. And before Lisa came on, Jennifer and I would take folks around the Supervisor of Elections and walk them through the process and let them understand a little bit what was going on with inside their own areas. We found that to be very effective. And I will tell you, one of the things that we have seen over and over that Florida is considered, and I was just talking to our Supervisor of Elections here in a minute, Florida is considered kind of the platinum standard nationally. And we're proud of that. Now, we've gone through our battles all the way back to 2001 and hanging chads and, 2000 hanging chads and all of that stuff. But I can tell you that we have just a collection of some of the best supervisor of elections who take their responsibility very, very seriously and do a great job. So today, one of the things we wanted to do, and I'm going to turn it over to Lisa here in just a second to let them do their introductions, is one of the things we wanted to do was to come back after the election cycle, and let's talk a little bit about what happened in 2024 from the Supervisor of Elections perspective, things that we did right, things that we might have done, could have done better, or things that we might want to put on the agenda to look at things we can do in the future, and then maybe some things that we're looking for in the future. And particularly, and I know one of the things we really wanted to talk about is, you remember the election cycle as we got started? About that time, we had some serious hurricanes hit our area. And a lot of places were just, they would freak out. Our folks were just on top of it, was able to move things, and people had the opportunity, had the ability to vote. And so we wanted to even talk a little bit about that. We're going to let them make sort of a presentation, but in the process, if you want to ask a question, there's two ways to do it. You can do it in the chat, so you see that you have a chat opportunity. And the second thing is just raise your hand. We'll watch, Lisa and I'll watch for it, and we'll get an opportunity to recognize you. And let's just sort of make this free-flowing in that way. Again, thank you for getting on. We appreciate it. We are really working here in the state of Florida to try to bring our citizens together. We think that, I don't care where your perspective is, but we all want to be good citizens and care to continue to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. With that, let me turn it over to Lisa. Lisa, if you want to do the introductions.
I'm going to allow, so we have with us today Ryan, Alina, Craig, and Brian, and I'm going to allow them each to do their own introductions. They can tell us what makes them special. I'm going to start with Ryan, if you don't mind.
Not at all. So my name is Ryan Cox. I am currently serving as the Deputy Executive Director of the Florida Supervisors of Elections. I am with the Ramba Consulting and Ramba Law Group. I had 12 years of legislative experience in both the House, Senate, and then also under Governor Scott in the Office of Policy and Budget before joining David Ramba's firm. And prior to that, I did about 6 years of litigation in both administrative law and criminal defense before I joined as legislative staff for policy. So obviously I am a lawyer and also now doing all kinds of different work. And one of the big things I'm doing is working with the Supervisors of Elections very closely to make sure that we continue that platinum standard and that they have what they need from both a association perspective and then also whatever they need with communication between the Department of State and then also the legislature.
Thank you very much. I'll move over to Brian.
Good afternoon. I started out my career in public administration over 32 years ago. I started out with the clerk of the circuit court in Pasco County, then switched up to the sheriff's office in Pasco County as the chief personnel officer. And then I was appointed by Governor Christ in January of 2007 to replace my predecessor had been in this position for 26 years, Kurt Browning, who became the Secretary of State. So that was a little bit of pressure, as you might imagine. I was on the job for literally 2 weeks, and the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, decided to switch voting systems. I was still trying to figure out where the bathrooms were in the coffee pot. So that was my trial by fire. I've been past president of our association. I was chairman of our legislative committee. My background education, I have a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree from USF in public administration. I'm an adjunct professor there as well. And I love what I do. And if it wasn't for the voters of my colleagues, I probably would have retired and moved to Ireland by now because of the climate we're in politically, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So honored to be with you all today.
Thank you so much. I'm going to move over to Craig.
Hey, good afternoon, and thank you for having us. I was born and raised right here in the Tampa area. I'm the Hillsborough County Supervisor of Election. Went to local schools, graduated from the University of South Florida. I went to the sheriff's office literally right out of high school, just about. I was an investigator trainee before it was cool. And then went on the road and spent most of my time in the homicide arena. I was a homicide detective, sergeant, lieutenant, captain. Then I transitioned to child protective investigations from the state to the sheriff's office. I was promoted to major when I retired. The next year I came to work here as the chief of staff for then Supervisor Phyllis Bazansky. Unfortunately, Phyllis passed away 6 months on the job. The governor appointed her replacement who came in and said he was going back to being retired. So I ended up running for the position. I'm in my fourth term now. One of the things I'm really proud of is that our office has been awarded the Governor Sterling Award. We're the only supervisor of elections so far that's achieved that status. And it's something that we've ingrained into our work culture each and every day. We're the fourth largest conglomerate of voters in the state. So we do have a big, like talk about, we've got more voters than the population in 4 states, actually. So it's a lot of planning and logistics that go into this job. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to move over to Alina. Alina, can you introduce yourself, please? And I want to thank Alina, who's out of the office and shouldn't be on the call, and said, if you need me on the call, I'll be on the call. And let me start by also saying that Alina is the first constitutionally elected supervisor of election for Miami-Dade County. She is a Sun 100 board member of our network, and she's also a friend. Alina?
Can you hear me, Lisa?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this today. You know, it's been a great journey. And I've, you know, before I was elected to be the supervisor of elections, I've worked for a lot of different elected officials. So yeah, I've worked on a lot of campaigns, and I know elections not only from the perspective of the supervisor of elections, but also from the candidate position, from campaign working, from all of that, and it's it really is. You know, I'm very blessed to have walked into Miami-Dade County Supervisor of Elections position because Christina White, my predecessor, who was appointed, not elected, has done a great job. And you know, Florida really throughout all of these years, after the big hanging chads and all of that occurred, I think that the legislature has passed great laws that really help. That our elections be fair and transparent. And, you know, once upon a time, we had the machines, you know, we had them for a little while, and the legislature immediately got rid of them. And we still vote on paper, which is wonderful. And we have 3 ways of voting in Miami-Dade County and all of Florida, which is by paper, by mail, or early voting when available. The small elections sometimes don't have the early voting, but you always have the vote by mail. So I was born in Cuba, and for me, democracy is super important, and it's very sad to see that there's a lot of countries around the world that used to have democracies that now people live in autocracies and dictatorships. And you know, I want to ensure that we that we keep our democracy here in the United States of America and Florida, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, you know, as supervisor of elections for Miami-Dade County, because I want to ensure that we have fair elections and that we protect our republic.
Thank you very much. And I'll turn it back over to Kurt.
Ryan, I'll start with you. I know that when we first were talking, and we did talk about it, I think we ought to probably start with maybe the big issue of what 2024. Give us an overview, and all you guys can sort of step in and say, tell us a little bit about what you saw. And I know you can talk it from your own perspective, but what you saw across the state that, frankly, we did right, that gave our citizens confidence that the election cycle was right and that they had their chance to vote and it was being counted the right way. So kind of give us an understanding of that.
So I think that one of the things that the Florida Supervisors of Elections do really, really well is community engagement and also community education. And so, while we talk about what went right in 2024 and all the effort that happened in 2024, that really backs up so much farther up before that, because these elected officials are going out into the community constantly educating voters on how does this process really work and how can you be secure in knowing how it's counted and how we report it and all of that. And so I think that that's a huge piece of why Florida is the platinum standard, is that they are doing that and are very transparent with how their operations work. And so I think that was going on way ahead of anything that was thrown our way in 2024, which was a lot. And you actually, two of the supervisors here, Supervisor Latimer and also Supervisor Corley, both were impacted by the storms. And so I'll let them speak more directly about how they handled it. But, there really was very few supervisors in the state that were not impacted by these hurricanes, whether it was just having to close a couple days in anticipation of a storm coming. And something that I never knew prior to starting to work so closely with the supervisors is truly how much work it takes to prepare for an election on a regular day. And then when you have to go and make sure that your equipment is protected and it's covered up and your building is safe, and then all of them stay close by to make sure that as soon as they practically can, they go back and check on their office and their equipment and their servers and all of that. And so it is, and unfortunately, not only were we hit with one storm, we were hit with two very close together with lots of impacts. And so that was a challenge, but it was also a challenge. There was constant communication, even when, we had some supervisors sleep in their office just to make sure, because there really wasn't going to be able to be an easy way. Like, I know one of our supervisors lives on the island, but the office is in the mainland. It's a coastal community, so stayed in their office to make sure that they could get access to there to check everything before, so that they could report back up to the Department of State. So it's things like that that are constantly considered by our supervisors of elections. And then also on the other side, the Secretary of State and the division really communicated with us a lot, trying to make sure that they were aware of the impacts to precincts as the development of all the storms came through. And then also we're very communicative on what exactly was needed to address the specific impacts to each county. I do know that there was also a lot of communication from the division to each of the local supervisors, and that did help create those the executive orders that helped make voting possible still in the 2024 cycle. And then again, our supervisors went and communicated all that to their voters, which is not a small feat in the midst of communication breakdowns and just people's lives being upended from a storm period. So I think I've probably talked enough. I can let the ones who were actually directly impacted speak to that more.
I remember reading the some of the news articles and so forth, and again, newspapers often will put the more salacious conversations going on. But it was like, well, some of these precincts and the polling apparatus and so forth in these affected areas are wiped out, and Republicans aren't going to be able to vote, or Democrats aren't going to be able to vote. And so I know, Brian, you and Craig obviously had to deal with all of that. Talk to us a little bit about how did that happen, and then how did you communicate that yes, you're going to get your vote's going to count, you're going to get the opportunity?
Craig, you want to go first, sir?
Sure. Yeah, so we did have a little impact from some storms. The first storm, Helene, was a flooding event. We had numerous areas in our county that took up to 3 feet of water. We have 2 islands just off a downtown area here, Davis Island and Harbor Island. Davis Island was completely inundated. We lost polling sites there. But more importantly, we were concerned about how we were going to communicate with these voters. We know that a lot of them were displaced. Some of them were still in town at other places. Some of them were in other counties. Some of them were in other states, wherever they were going for safe refuge at that point. That was one of the key points that Ryan was mentioning in the executive order, is that we were able to more rapidly verify who these voters were. They could call in, give us certain information we could verify, and then we could get a vote by mail ballot to them. I think that, that was kind of interesting. We had the flooding from that storm, and then right behind it, Milton, which was a wind event, and a huge wind event at that. That one was the one that started knocking out a lot of power, but ironically, we also had up to 16 inches of rain. We had places in Hillsborough County that were not in a flood zone that flooded. We lost additional polling sites in coming up to the general election. What we did lose was a bunch of power, though. As a matter of fact, my main office, we were out of power for about 8 days, got the power back the Monday before early voting started. Fortunately, we learned how to work remotely from COVID, and we were able to work remotely, start checking in with our poll workers. We didn't know how many of our poll workers might have been impacted also. Finding new polling sites, having to co-locate polling sites. So by the time we got our power back on that Monday, we literally were ready to hit the ground running, and we did. A little additional add to that, we plan all the time for hurricanes. There's no doubt about that. I tell a story too. This is kind of an aside. I mentioned I was with the sheriff's office back when Hurricane Andrew hit Miami. I took the first group of deputies down there on a mutual aid. We were working the night shift, and every night we'd go to this Navy mess tent down in Homestead to eat. And all of a sudden there was a big sign up there that said it was going to be off limits for the next 2 days. Turned out that was a voting site in that election, because the polling site had been wiped out by the hurricane. So they were using that as a polling site. But we were able to get this done. Ironically, I had to get a new early vote site, and ended up going into where FEMA was actually working out of, that we had a site there. So there was a lot that went into it. But we planned for hurricanes quite a bit. What I didn't plan for was on election day, the general election, the first person in my office came in about 5 a.m. and we had no phones and no internet. They were both down. So we had 240 polling sites that we need to open, where normally the clerks would call into us and let us know they're there. But my people had a backup plan. We ended up opening 240 polling sites with flip phones, iPads, and MiFi's hotspots. And we got it done. We got power back. It was nothing nefarious. We had a modem card went out, and a fiber modem about 2 miles north of our office. And the flip side of that is we had a backup provider for our internet. And turns out that after we contracted with them, they turned around and contracted with our original provider. So we lost both at that point. But it didn't impact the election. It didn't impact keeping anybody from voting whatsoever.
Yeah, if I can piggyback off of that, having done this for 20 years now, I think back to being at conferences, and Craig can relate to this. We would sit and give a thunderous applause to an SOE or SOEs, usually in the Panhandle, that made it work during an election and a hurricane. And then we've been so well versed at both the local, state, federal level the importance of a continuation of operations or COOP plan, training, hundreds of trainings. What I learned is that kind of goes out the window to some degree when it's my first experience administering an election during not one but two storms, as was stated, and things like losing communications, not realizing what sites are able to use. In our case, we fared a lot better than Hillsborough and Pinellas, but being told half of our early voting sites were not being able to be accessed because they were used as FEMA shelters, for example. And when we were expecting a massive in-person turnout, that was challenging. Each election cycle, I have like a little theme I share with my staff. And in the start of 24, the theme was patience and positivity, dealing with a lot of misinformation, kind of the angry electorate. We added patience, positivity, and then added make it work after those storms, just basically make it work. And we were able to pull it off. But I think back to, we had some areas, low-lying areas that were flooded, some mobile home parks in East Pasco that they were getting meals brought into them. They were not able to leave. They were not able to get their mail. And so I was within a day or two of having one of the high-profile sheriff's office vehicles going in there to drop off vote by mail ballots or collect them. Luckily, the sun was able to evaporate some of the water, but we made it work, if you will. We had the day after the hurricane came through, we didn't have comms in our West Pasco office, and the tax collector had opened up their office. Unbeknownst to me, voters showed up and were sliding their vote by mail ballots, voted under my office door, with which is not exactly a drop box or a secure ballot intake station. And so I had to kind of deal with that. That was quite a challenge, as you might imagine. But as has been alluded to, Florida does do it right. And what was great about us is, the three-legged stool: election day, early voting, and vote by mail. You have options, and I guess I was very pleased to see, quite frankly, the return of civility when voters showed up to vote. There was palatable tension in 2016, and then of course we had COVID in 2020. But I'm pleased to report, voters came out and they were way more civil than they had been in the past, and that was a good thing. But having to combat not only the storms but the torrent of misinformation, disinformation, the confirmation bias. We do a lot of outreach, as Ryan and Craig alluded to, dealing with constituents that if what you tell them doesn't subscribe to what they're watching on their cable news show or seeing online, then it's literally fake news if it doesn't subscribe to what they already believe. And having to deal with outright falsehoods from the My Pillow guy, for example. I had conversations with voters, and we would walk through the process of how I know my vote's secure, for example, and I would get the answer would ultimately be, "You seem knowledgeable, but I believe the My Pillow guy. I believe Mike Lindell." So that was a challenge, and dealing with both storms and misinformation, disinformation. But again, I'm pleased to report that we definitely pulled it off and made it work.
I'd like to camp around that just for a second, not on Mike Lindell, although I did have a conversation with him back in May, and he was saying, "Oh, Florida's got all kind of problems." I'm like, no, we really don't. But that's a different issue. But the concerns are when the day comes of elections, and we had one little minor incident that I heard of, and we jumped in and tried to make sure we assuaged any of the fears in the Jacksonville area. We kind of dealt with that, and we obviously dealt with your association to say, make sure we are handling this right way and getting the right information out. Voter confidence is important, and then the way voter behavior when they come to the poll is also important. Let's talk around that. I'll ask all three of you. You represent different areas, different situations, turmoils and so forth, different populations. What did you see in 2024? I know, Brian, you just sort of mentioned that, but what did you see there that probably allowed people to be in a more civil-minded way of being able to respond?
I can tell you, in our area, it was kind of a sense of normalcy, quite frankly, that somebody was able to go ahead and cast that ballot, either bring in their vote by mail ballot and drop it off a secure ballot intake station, or voting in person. We had a huge in-person vote. And in my county and around the state, this was the highest turnout we've ever had in an election. So we gave the people an opportunity to vote, and they took advantage of it. And I think it was a little bit of a feeling of normalcy to them. But, I think that it leads up to this, too, that there's been a lot of changes in statute that's taken place around some of this misinformation that's out there that's given more opportunity for individuals appointed by candidates or parties to have points of observation through the process. You know, they can look at the same vote by mail signatures that we do. They can come in and watch tabulation. They can come in and watch us opening the actual ballots and separating them. So, you know, taking some of that mystery out of it. And, you know, you got to remember that before every election, by law, every county in the state has to conduct what's called a public logic and accuracy test. That's where we take a random sample of the tabulators to be used election day early vote and all of the high-speed scanners that are used for vote by mail, and we run what's called a test deck through them. We know what the outcome should be. And this is done in a public setting, plain view for everybody to see. They can see the results. You know, they can literally look over our shoulder at that point. And then the machines are locked down, seals are placed back in them. They're deployed out to the community for voting. They're in the wide open plain view. The results come back. The unofficial results are then put out. And then by law, again, after every election, we have to conduct a post-election audit. And we can do that one of two ways. You can have your canvassing board randomly select a race and precincts, and you can go find all the ballots, early vote, election day, vote by mail, and then sit down with teams and hand count those ballots. I can tell you that that is a cumbersome method to do it. I've got some precincts that have well over 12,000 voters in them. So if they pick a county-wide race in a couple of these precincts, you're going to be there for hours trying to hand count ballots. The other way we can do it is with a certified audit system, which is basically another tabulation system. And we're required to put at least 20% of the precinct ballots through this audit system. And I think all the supervisors actually do 100%. I know my county does. We put every single ballot that went through a tabulator or high-speed scanner goes through this audit system. And you can readily see that your system is counting correctly with that. And a lot of people don't know that. You know, we heard in 2020 about doing a forensic audit, which I still don't know exactly what a forensic part of that audit is. But by law, every county in this state has to do a post-election audit. They've got to do the public logic and accuracy test on the front, the post-election audit on the other end. Things like that, when people find out about it, I think it does instill a little bit of confidence in the process. And again, opening it up, letting the people see, you know, the observation of the signature verification. We actually give them the same training that we have to go through by law. They can take it if they want to. They don't have to. Most of them do.
We have a question that's just came into the message, and Joe was asking, what was the percentage of eligible voters that voted in 2024? I know it was a fairly large turnout. I think you said in Hillsborough you had the largest ever. Guys, give us your percentage that you said, people who registered to vote and then the people that actually turned out to vote.
Yeah, in Hillsborough County, we had a 77% turnout.
That's amazing. That's big. Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, we had just over 80%. For us, it was the second largest recorded ever. And you know, that was great to see. And something Craig alluded to, let me piggyback off of that. If nothing else, what has resulted from the intense scrutiny post 2020 are constituents calling up, individuals, activists, election integrity activists calling up, and they're unaware of what Craig alluded to, our public testing of our machines. You know, we invite them, come out, watch what we do. Come out and you can be an observer when we're canvassing our vote by mail ballots. Everything we do is transparent. And that goes a long way, particularly when you know, in the general of 24, we had not only a manual recount, but we had a recount judicial race for Pasco and Pinellas. So we were able to look at 800. There was one vote difference for Community Development District, and the machines we use technology, Clear Audit, affirmed that one vote difference, as well as the recount for every ballot cast in Pasco and Pinellas. So it was great to be able to have that discussion with some of those that were really more engaged than they used to be. So that was definitely a blessing, I believe.
Elena, do you want to address this? I know you weren't the supervisor at that time, but you were certainly engaged in it. You got a chance to look at it. You want to address this issue as well?
It's my understanding that we had a very, very high turnout. I think it was like 90%.
Oh my gosh, that's huge in Miami.
Yeah, Miami-Dade County, came out to vote.
And
And
Alina, what do you think the biggest challenge for you, for the voters of Miami-Dade County, is moving forward?
I think that, ensuring that people feel confident that we have a fair system, and also because Miami-Dade County, we have so many people becoming U.S. citizens that have never voted. Education, I think that those are the primary subjects that we need to ensure that we educate, and we're out there in the community and we're doing a lot of new things now. And I have to build on a great we're building on a great department that I received from Christina, but I think that that's it. Ensuring that people feel confident, that they trust our Department of Elections, and continue to do that great work. I think we're very blessed in Florida to have the best system.
When I was telling the folks before we got on the call that in 2022, we took a whole group of folks. There were folks that were buying into a lot of the misinformation, and that's
Right.
one of the big areas. And we took a group of them into where I live in Ocala, and Wesley Wilcox, who's just fantastic. And he walked them through each stage of the process, the security process, how it's counted, how it's under cameras, how it, all the boxes, how they would be brought in. It was amazing. And people who had we went and got some folks that, I'll be careful in saying it like this, but they're a little bit of curmudgeons. They were, I don't believe anything, and maybe they were listening to the My Pillow guy. And the reality is, when they came out there, they all shook their head and said, "We're amazed. This is amazing." And it's a great story to tell. And so, guys, that's really what this is about here. Is we've got a lot of civic leaders that are engaged in this process, and we want to be able to help with that. While we're doing this, guys, if you have a question, raise your hand or come off of mute. And let's get you guys a little bit engaged here while we got it. Any questions that you want to offer up right now? Anyone? And
while you're waiting on that, Kurt, I might add something. Of course, going back to 2020, looked at a lot of video that was out there that's being reported. One of the ones that really seems to be kind of a central theme is they like to show a tabulation room where they're tabulating a deck of ballots, a pile of ballots, and then they retabulate the exact same one, and they might do it a third time. And to those in the election business, we know immediately what's going on. If there was either a double feed or something happened and they didn't save that deck, they redid it again. They dumped out the results from the first one because they didn't correct. And then they would put the thing back through again until all of them did in fact count correctly. And it had taken 3 times. But like I said, those in the election business know immediately what that was. I was watching one of them. They used the exact same equipment that we do, and they never saved the results. They started all over again.
Right. Right.
But without seeing something like that and having someone walk you through it, you wouldn't know that necessarily. That you don't know that it doesn't save unless there's an action to save it, and therefore, would play into why you would maybe run it again. Which is why I really do appreciate how much education the supervisors in our state do to help, and how open they are with people coming in and seeing truly how they operate.
Yeah.
Andrea, your hand. Yeah, go ahead, Andrea.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you for putting on this informational session. It's my first time tuning in, and I have found it beneficial thus far. So thank you so much. I reside in Pinellas County, and so when you're talking about the storms, I totally relate. I lived through it. I was on the ground working the campaign during that time. And my question really now comes into how are the supervisors and the offices of our supervisor of elections following and planning to respond as some of the legislation that's working its way both federally and in our state of Florida that may impact how people register to vote, early voting. There's some legislation out there that may cut early voting from 15 days to 10. And I know we run like right up against storm season, like runs right up in sync with an election season. And so how, I'd be interested to know, how are our election officers following this legislation, and how will that impact those who will be registering to vote and voting?
Ryan, this sounds like it's one for Ryan almost immediately at the state level. Go ahead. I run an association too, so I would handle it. Go ahead, Ryan.
So one of the things that we do as association staff is, so we are following all of the bills. Some of them, obviously, you know, not only do we follow bills, we also just follow, because sometimes you may just have a piece in one of the bills. So like, for instance, there's one bill that's dealing with emergencies overall, but it does have an elections piece. So our firm does that and helps the association. So the association has a legislative committee, and there are also certain supervisors who are set to be on a fast response committee. So if we need information on, hey, how does this particular thing work? Or do you have the ability to do this? Whether it be like, and we won't get into it, but there was a debit card piece there. So I just went off. There we go. Okay. So, you know, we have people who we can reach out to very quickly and get information on really how does this work within your offices process-wise. You know, we don't tend to comment on the policy. It is more of a, can this work within the laws and within the processes we have as supervisors, and with the ability to communicate that to our voters, things like that. So we are obviously, you know, we work closely with both chambers and then also with the governor's staff and the secretary to try and provide that feedback on how things work. But that's how we operate within that.
And I just want to add something to that too. And my friend and colleague, Brian Corley, says it all the time, is the best advocate for a voter in your county is your supervisor of election, regardless of party affiliation. They're always going to be the biggest advocate for the voters. One of the things I like to point out is that it used to be a vote by mail. If you forgot to sign the back of that envelope or your signature didn't match, it was a fatal flaw. There was no recourse, no remedy for it. And our statewide association advocated for years to change that. And the legislature did change it, that there is now a remedy for that vote by mail ballot. If you forgot to sign it or the signature doesn't match, there's an affidavit you fill out and then furnish us with a copy of one of the acceptable forms of identification. And it's going to be accepted at that point, most probably. I also would like to say that as a supervisor, I always talk all the time about there's politics and elections. My office runs elections.
Great point, Craig. Let me just, if I could piggyback off that real quick, and Craig's absolutely right. I had the pleasure of actually serving as the chairman of our legislative committee during the 2013 session, post 2012, where there were lines. The ballot was quite lengthy. And I literally worked with then chairman of Ethics Election Center, Latvala, on that point of we ran some numbers, and I know in my own county in 2012 general, there was 109 voters who just simply did not sign their certificate envelope. And then Craig's right, under that law, existing law, we could not count that. And I remember making the case, and the legislature luckily agreed that you look back at the 2000 election. How close was it? We know it came down to Florida. Out of over 6 million votes cast, it was only a difference of 537 votes that decided the presidency. And there were definitely more than 537 unsigned in the 2012 election. So we were able to do those good things. We had advocated for one size doesn't fit all with Florida's diverse counties, all 67. What Supervisor Garcia needs is not the same as what I would need, and what I would need is not the same as maybe a Baker County would need, or a Clay County, for example. So we advocated that pretty strongly. So, and lastly, let me just say to the previous question, you know, how are we going to deal with future storms and interruptions going forward? There were some lessons learned from 2020 in my shop. My favorite historical President Reagan, once said it best: the 8 most feared words in the English language. I'm from the government. I'm here to help. We not in Pasco, not in Florida, because I know when COVID came on our shores leading up to the March 2020 presidential preference primary, we lost almost a third of our election workers. They were elderly, they were scared, and rightfully so. I reached out to our fellow constitutional officers in my county, the sheriff, the property appraiser, the clerk of the court, the superintendent of schools, et cetera. And they were able to get us election workers. And then in our line of work, the greatest form of flattery is imitation. I literally borrowed, I use the word borrowed loosely from my good friend Craig Latimer, the concept of a civic leave where we have county employees and those that work at the county level that will be election workers for the day. And that has saved us big time. That helped us out in 2024 storms. We were able to staff a call center from county employees, and going forward, I think that's going to help us, make it work again.
That's awesome. We've got some questions. Jacqueline, I see you put one in the chat. You just want to go ahead and read it off to us and ask the question? Or I can read it for you. I got it. It says, I'm concerned about mail-in ballots. It seems that there is a calculated effort to make voting by mail more difficult. You want to address that issue?
Yeah, I mean, vote by mail is relatively a simple process. First off, you have to be a registered voter. You have to request that vote by mail ballot. We don't just automatically send them out. When you request it, you've just got to furnish us with a driver's license number, the last 4 years social, something that you would have put on your initial registration information, so that we can verify it and make sure that we're sending a ballot to somebody that is a registered voter and requesting it. You can also track that ballot back to my office. You can see when it's going to be received by my office and actually when it's tabulated and counted. Because in Florida, that's one of the reasons that we're on top of it, is that we can start actually tabulating those vote by mail ballots about 22 days before the election. That's why on election night, we're able to put that information out very rapidly. There's three methods. Brian said it, the three-legged stool. You've got vote by mail, early vote, and election day. That early vote ballot, you can either mail it back. In Hillsborough County, I pay the return postage, or you can drop it at any of our 27 early vote sites during early voting hours, or you can bring it to any of my 5 offices. So I think it's a relatively safe and efficient way to vote.
Melinda, I believe you've asked a question for Alina, and you wanted to ask, how do we protect the integrity of elections from non-citizens who attempt to vote?
Well, when you register to vote, you sign an affidavit that you are a U.S. citizen, and then we check that. We check that through the rolls through the state and the driver's license, the Social Security, and all that. Every so often, somebody can vote that is not supposed to vote, but it doesn't really happen. It doesn't really happen a lot. I would like to see a change that you would have to show proof of citizenship when you register to vote. I think that would be something that would ensure that everybody that votes is, a U.S. citizen. But actually, even though the law doesn't ask for that now, it doesn't happen often. It happens, but it's very minimal that non-citizens vote.
Yeah, if I can just piggyback off that, it's a great point by my colleague. It is rare. I think everyone agrees, regardless of where you politically stand, we only want those that are eligible to be registered to vote. And of course, 100% of those individuals voting. That's our simple SOE creed.
Yeah.
And there's some pending legislation. There's the SAVE Act at the federal level, which philosophically I have no issue with. It would require an individual to provide proof of citizenship themselves, much like the real ID, if you will, when you get your driver's license. I said philosophically, I'm concerned about the logistics of implementing it. We saw Arizona and Kansas had tried that. It's not really worked out that well. And I believe I read back last September, October, someone from Governor DeSantis' administration at the Department of State had testified, reached out to Congress, and indicated they identified 437 non-U.S. citizens on Florida's voter rolls, which is, one is too many. I think we all agree, but that's out of almost 14 million voters. It's like 0.0000001%. So it had become kind of a political boogeyman that there's rampant non-U.S. citizen voting. The past data had shown it's just simply not the case. Can we improve on the integrity? We always can. The problem is there's no magical database that says definitively citizen, non-U.S. citizen. The
Is
issue with, I'm sorry?
Is the real ID, I'm sorry to interrupt you, is the real ID is available to citizens and non-citizens, correct? The
What-
Florida Real ID. I thought that was like a more secure form, and I understood it, which I'm not sure now, but I thought that only citizens could get the real ID for Florida.
And that's true. It doesn't cover everyone. If you've been to the Real ID, I think most of us had. You had to provide all kinds of information to prove your citizenship. So there is that now. But some of the issues, for example, you could have someone who gets a driver's license, is not a U.S. citizen. That's more than legal. They're here on a green card legally, and then they get their citizenship and they don't have to renew their driver's license for 7 years. So the data has shown where they think they have people who are non-U.S. citizens on the voter rolls. It turns out there's just a bureaucratic lag time. So that ends up being the issue. And in fact, I believe back in 2012, then Governor Scott had requested that we use this. They got information from the federal SAVE database, and we had it was allegations of I think 200,000 non-U.S. citizens. Ended up being at that time, I believe, 196. The accuracy was so bad, we literally stopped doing it because the voters were like, I was born in Columbus, Ohio. Why are you saying I'm not a U.S. citizen? It was that rampant as far as the inaccuracy. So there's no magic bullet that'll solve the whole thing. But obviously, we agree you can never have enough integrity and, quite frankly, access as well to voting.
Right. Hey, Tanya, good seeing you. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah. Yes, good to be here. I'm president of the League of Women Voters for North Pinellas County, and I will have to say that we have always been very supportive of our Supervisor of Elections. We think that Julie and Dustin and their crew do a fantastic job here in Pinellas County.
We taught them everything they know.
Many of us at the League, we are also poll workers. We encourage people to be poll workers. A lot of our members are poll workers. We also did the canvassing board monitoring projects. And when you were talking about disinformation and how important it is for people to be involved in looking at those systems, logic and accuracy, I've done that I don't know how many times. That is a fantastic way for people to understand how ridiculous the fraud comments are as far as our elections. With us here in North Pinellas County, and I'm sure all across Florida, we are very concerned and getting even more concerned about vote by mail. And it's not, we know vote by mail is wonderful, but what we're concerned about is the re-requesting a mail ballot. Ever since that has come into play, we continue to see a decline in the vote by mail. We are out in the community all of the time saying the same thing. You have to re-request a mail ballot. People get angry at us and say, why did you make it that way? And I say, we did not. We are just out here trying to make sure you understand that. But it's, we see it in our elderly community, but not only that, you see it among people who are busy, working moms and dads. They don't remember this re-requested mail ballot. Then the time comes for an election, they're waiting for their vote by mail ballot. They don't get it. So we're very concerned about vote by mail and this re-requesting a mail ballot, and wanted to know on the legislative side if you have seen any movement on trying to, I don't know if they could rescind that or just have some better legislation around re-requesting that mail ballot.
Ryan, you want to take that one?
Sure. I do think that it's been something that has been talked about more recently. Obviously, we saw a different circumstance surrounding that with all of our special elections that were called very quickly after the calendar turned over. And so a lot of those vote by mail request ballots, the requests had been zeroed out for the last election cycle. I do know, the department packages that were filed by the House and the Senate member do not address that. I'm not saying that won't happen, but I do know that it is not I have not seen that in any of the bills that have been filed up to this point.
And let me add to that too. I can tell you that when that law did change, we had a City of Tampa election in March, right after the law went into effect. And we did a tremendous amount of mailing to people to let them know about that. And we started hitting it heavy on our social media, all of our outreach, everything that we were doing. I can tell you, whenever there's an election getting ready to happen, The press is always wanting different sound bites from us, and my regular sound bite was, if you want to vote by mail ballot, you've got to request it. It's not coming automatically. So, all of the supervisors, a lot of us used to have the checkbox on there. Pinellas, for sure. Deb Clark started it, and Julie continued it. And that was a great method. But then when the legislature changed for, making sure that people were, in fact, being properly identified as registered voters, and they were having to furnish that driver's license number or social, we can't put that on the envelope. Plus, it's a specific form that has to be used to request that now. We've continued to mail, but what we have seen in Hillsborough County here is an absolute tremendous uptick this last election in early voting. I mean, by the thousands. We had people that converted over from vote by mail, and I don't know if it built so much during COVID because that was the most requests we had ever had. Over 400,000 people had requested vote by mail ballots during COVID. Now, I'll tell you, about 100,000 of them ended up voting in person. They felt safe enough to go ahead and vote in person that had requested a vote by mail ballot. So, I hear what you're saying 100%, but I think that I know that the supervisors are constantly talking about different ways that we can reach voters and let them know about that. I actually partner with my tax collector, and for several months before the election, they'll put our insert in there. And one of the inserts that goes into that, renewal for tags or whatever it is reminding people to vote, that they have to request that vote by mail ballot again. This similar thing happened back in, I think it was 2010. The legislature took it from 2 cycles to 1 cycle, and then they put it back to 2 cycles again. So things are always fluid there.
We're going to have to put a bow on this thing. I appreciate everybody being a part of it. My takeaway as I'm listening to this is it gives me great confidence to know that both from the education, training, but the commitment of our leaders in the local community that serve their local community, or when it comes to the votes and making sure people have an opportunity. What better way to take care of this? I mean, it shouldn't come from Tallahassee. It shouldn't come from Washington. I think it's a local thing. You guys do a marvelous job. The leadership in our state is exceptional. And I would tell you that we know that you could be probably at the get the focal point of people taking shots at you and so forth. And we at what we're trying to do with the Sunshine 100 and in conjunction with the Carter Center, we are trying to make sure that we allow for different opinions and discourse, but that we actually are trying to get out accurate information, especially when it comes around the vote. And so for you guys, I hope you're heartened by today seeing the folks that were answering these questions, how they have this plethora of information and so forth. Ryan, for your statewide leadership, Craig and Brian and Lena, representative, thank you guys for being here, being a part of this today. We're looking forward to this upcoming cycle. Hopefully we won't have any hurricanes. All right, let's say this: no hurricanes are allowed this next cycle. But I hope that as we're as a group here, we're putting out the message that in Florida we have some great things. We're not perfect, we know that, but we know that we are striving to be a more perfect union. And so I very much appreciate the leadership that we have here. Before we close out, I want to say one thing. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa for our next event that we're going to have next month. You're going to want to be a part of this. It's a lot of stuff that Lisa and I love to work on, certainly with Jennifer. So Lisa, let me turn it over to you and talk about next time.
So our next monthly meeting will be in April, and you guys may or may not know that May 1st is the National Day of Prayer. And so we have a toolkit to be able to reach out to local officials, to your elected officials, to your faith leaders, to your congregations, your churches, your pastors, to ask them to get involved and speak on peacemaking. And one of the things we're going to do is send out an email to all of you, asking you to send us just a 1-minute video. What does it look like to be a peacemaker? And we're going to put that together and send it out on the National Day of Prayer, reminding people the National Day of Prayer should be introspective. It should be a moment where you look in the mirror and say, how can I, as a person of faith, how can I get closer to God? And how can I be more like God, right? How can I reflect him better to others? And one of the ways we do that is by showing humility and kindness. So we really hope, whether you're a person of faith or not, that you will join the call, because we believe that you can use this time to reach people in your community who might need to hear that message. So we invite you to join. Kurt will be leading, and you may not know that Kurt is actually a ordained pastor. And so I'm really looking forward to our talk in April. And
guys,
Lorianne, I don't know if you can put the invite in there. If not, we'll email it out to everybody.
yeah, we're going to email to everybody. Invite people to this one. We think it's important. This is our goal. Listen, we never talk about you can't have this view or this view is better than this view. We're all mature adults here. But at the end of the day, we do want to bring the conversation. It's time to have discourse. It's time to have conversation. And
so we like to talk about the two things that you're not allowed to talk about: politics and religion.
And with that said, you're invited, guys, to the Supervisor of Elections. Again, you guys are superstars. We are so blessed to have you here in Florida and what you do. Thank you. Please tell the rest of the 64 that we didn't get to talk to, or so how much we appreciate them. Say something nice about Wesley Wilcox here from Ocala. He's a good guy. And we appreciate you. We love you. To our Sunshine 100 folks, thank you for getting on, and let's continue to heal through love and peace. And with that, God bless. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.